Tell me, have you ever wondered why you can be under the threat of deportation even in such a calm and prosperous country as Switzerland? And who most often faces this risk are only those who have done something terrible, or are ordinary tourists also at risk? Have you thought what kind of actions or errors can lead to such a serious consequence as enforced leaving for the country of origin, sometimes in just a few days? Traveling to different countries, I understood one thing: in every corner of the world there are out-of-closed laws, and especially strictly related to Switzerland. The rule acts here: be ready not only to respect the traditions, but also to thoroughly know the rules of your stay, even if you arrived only for a couple of weeks. In the Swiss law, the concept of deportation is quite strict, and not only people who have committed serious crimes can fall under it. It turns out that the real risk of expulsion is waiting for those who simply updated the visa on time, forgot to issue a work permit, or, say, made a mistake with the documents. Moreover, this applies not only to the inhabitants of the former USSR. Tourists from absolutely any countries, guests on working, student, family visas are subject to these rules on an equal basis. But why did the legislation become more strict in recent years? Why are there more and more cases of deportations with formulations like, in order to protect public order, on the fact of violation of migration norms, in connection with the falsification of documents or fraud in the social sphere? It turns out that the answer lies in the combination of modern challenges on the influx of migrants and changes in the labor market to political decisions within Switzerland itself. This breaks the stereotype that problems with deportation are only those who commit serious violations. Everything is not so simple. Sometimes even a banal misunderstanding can lead to big troubles. In this issue, we honestly, with real examples and without unnecessary panic, we will analyze the most common reasons why people are deported from Switzerland, and what to do not get into a similar situation. I'll tell you what is happening at the time of the detention, how is the case with lawyer support, what mistakes are the expansion, students, tourists, and even families with children. We drove together to figure out how not to cross the invisible feature and keep their chances for a free trip, study, or work in this amazing, but such a demanding country. Next, I will tell in detail about each reason. Get ready, there will be a lot of unexpected. Tightness of migration laws, why the rules have become stricter. Before moving on to the reasons for deportation, let's honestly figure out why the system itself has changed and became tougher literally before our eyes. 10 to 15 years ago, many considered Switzerland the standard of calm and hospitality, where local laws seemed eternal and unshakable. But times are changing, and today even those who came to this country as a tourist for the weekend feel a fresh wind of change. In recent years, the Switzerland authorities are increasingly tightening migration laws, and this is not just formality on paper. The reason is an avalanche-like stream of migrants to Europe, refugee waves, and a sharp aggravation of the political situation in neighboring countries. For example, in 1 week alone, 11,000 people arrived on the Italian island of Lampedusa, which is almost twice as much as the permanent population of the island. Switzerland, a neighboring country, cannot ignore such processes. Therefore, new control rules on the borders come into business, and the requirements for those who enter the country are tightened. In response to these challenges, the Swiss government began to strengthen control in the most vulnerable areas, as happened with the border with Italy. Decisions are now made with an eye on the situation in the region and even on international calls, but Switzerland increasingly refuses to help neighbors, motivating this with internal problems and the need to maintain social stability in the country. Approaches to the issuance of visas, residence permits, and extending status for foreign citizens have also changed. For example, even the issues of providing temporary asylum began to be considered under a microscope. If earlier certain statuses were assigned automatically to whole groups of people, a point approach is now used, taking into account the real situation where a person lived before entering the country. It is understood each new law or rule becomes another step on which you cannot stumble. Those who are used to carefree trips or underestimate the importance of local requirements often find themselves in an unpleasant situation. For tourists, this means that even simple forgetfulness or negligence can turn into serious consequences. And for those who plan to stay longer, it is important to remember that the rights and benefits are now issued not by default, but for real merits or a proven necessity. The following chapters fit perfectly into this new order, where I will talk about the specific reasons why people risk losing the right to be in this beautiful and such demanding country. Get ready, many points will surprise you, and some will even make you think about their habits and plans. The first reason, serious crimes against the individual. And now we move on to the very first, most obvious, but also one of the most severe causes of deportation is the commission of serious crimes against the individual. It sounds strictly, and it is here that the laws of Switzerland show their well-known uncompromising. Even if you arrived on a tourist visa for a couple of days, you turned out to be a student or a highly qualified specialist, actions related to causing serious harm to another person automatically entail early parting with Switzerland. What is meant by serious crimes against the personality? These are not just household quarrels or, for example, too loud party. We are talking about actions such as applying especially serious bodily harm, attack with the use of force, taking hostages, as well as sexual crimes. Even a one-time gross violation can lead not only to deportation, but also to a long ban on entry, from 5 to 15 years old, and for people with repeated violations even up to 20 years. Interestingly, in the Switzerland system, the courts act quickly enough. For example, there were several resonant cases when people were sent only a few weeks after the sentence, without the right to serve sentences in the country itself. The law here clearly emphasizes, if such an offense is committed, further stay of a foreigner is dangerous for society. In practice, there are also situations when the police intervention simply helped prevent the worst consequences in time, but the very fact of a threat or causing serious harm is already the basis for expulsion. It does not matter whether this was the first misconduct or a person already has precedence, the Swiss Migration Service looks only at the fact of the crime itself. I would like to especially note, in Switzerland, personal safety is extremely highly appreciated, so the attitude to any acts of aggression or violence here is not at all the same as in some other European countries. Even if the criminal punishment for the misconduct seems soft, the Migration Department can decide on the expulsion regardless of the court. Many might think that this applies only to serious criminals, but in fact, sometimes one careless act is enough to be among the expelled ones. Even rash conflicts on the street, in a bar or club, accompanied by harm to another person, can lead to irreversible consequences for your visa, status, or even future plans for staying in Europe. My advice to all travelers, students and expats is to always remember the high bar of personal responsibility and vigilance in communication. Indeed, for the Swiss authorities, the most important thing is the safety and confidence that the stay of a foreigner is not at risk to society. The second reason, crimes with the use of violence and the threat of life. Now we will analyze another category of violations for which Switzerland definitely does not make concessions. These are crimes associated with violence or a clear threat to the life and safety of other people. Moreover, we are talking not only about those actions that are considered serious, but also about all actions where there is the use of force, intimidation, or an attempt to create a danger to others. In Swiss practice, this can be robbery, attack with the use of weapons, extortion with a threat of harm, as well as participation in group fights with serious consequences. If your actions are perceived as creating a real threat to the life or health of others, the consequences occur almost instantly. After the sentence, the migration services are not even obliged to understand the details for a long time, a sufficiently established fact that an offense with elements of violence was committed. For example, there were cases when foreigners were deported even after a single episode if this incident received a public resonance or caused anxiety among local residents. Regardless of the status, citizenship or country from which a person came, the attitude when considering violations is absolutely the same. The security of society is always above a private situation. Even if the deported has relatives in Switzerland or employers working under a contract, these circumstances rarely save from expulsion. Another feature of the work of the Swiss system is preventive thinking. If a foreigner demonstrated a tendency to aggression or was involved in events in which there was a risk for order or life, returning to the country for many years is in question. The Swiss often explain this very simply: anyone who has arrived here as a guest must prove their absolute predictability from the point of view of the law. Do not forget that cases related to violence are attracted to migration and criminal law professionals, and from the country they often expel not only convicts, but even those in the affairs of which only an administrative investigation was conducted if the risk was recognized as quite serious. Personal experience suggests many amenable to provocations in nightclubs, at sporting events or holidays, without thinking about the consequences. In Switzerland, even a small skirmish, especially if it fell under the recording of cameras or caused the police arrival, is always a potential risk of being among the expelled foreign citizens. Keep yourself in your hands, give way to controversial situations. Here it is not a manifestation of weakness, but elementary prudence. The third reason, drug trafficking. Now let's move on to one of the most unpleasant and serious topics that, unfortunately, cannot be forgotten about. This is drug trafficking or participation in any matters related to their distribution. In Switzerland, this issue is extremely acute, because the state is aimed at the complete protection of its own society, especially young people, from negative influence. It is important to understand here, drug crime is not forgiven for anyone, neither a tourist, nor a student, nor even a person who has lived for many years for a good reason in the country and integrated well. For the Swiss system, there are no small things in this area. If you have even once been drawn into the distribution, transportation, sale or mediation in transactions with prohibited substances, there is only one consequence: immediate deportation and a ban on entry, which can last most of your life. The strict position of the local authorities is indicative. If the incident falls into the field of view of the police or customs, the case is automatically referred to the Migration Service, which almost always decides on expulsion. Important, if there was an attempt to transport drugs across the border, the punishment occurs, even if you simply followed the order or did not know that you were transporting a prohibited substance. The law here does not provide for the possibility of justifying a violation of ignorance. Even the minimum amount of the substance discovered during personal inspection becomes an occasion to begin an administrative or even criminal case, and then the deportation procedure. Additional risk, if a foreigner is detained, who is suspected of creating a sales network or storing even small parties for the purpose of sale, the consequences are most stringent. Even if the term of conclusion under the criminal article is relatively small, the deportation will be required. The Swiss see in such offenses a direct threat of the entire social tissue of the country, because the drug market is considered one of the main factors of criminalization of society. Examples from life once again confirm, many have heard or read stories when foreign students or guests by stupidity took part in the transportation of something for acquaintances, and then for years they could not return to Switzerland, but also to other European states due to a record in the general information system. Tourists who in an unfamiliar environment can fall into the tricks of unscrupulous people are especially vulnerable. Therefore, my urgent advice, stay away from any dubious proposals related to the translation, purchase, transportation, or even discussion of them about prohibited substances. In Switzerland, curiosity and the lack of evil intent are not a reason for condescension. Complete zero tolerance and automatic reaction of the state make any risks unjustified, and the consequences are irreversible. The fourth reason, theft, robbery, fraud. Now we will discuss one of the most common, but sometimes the most underestimated causes of deportation. These are different forms of theft, fraud, and robbery. At first glance, it seems that these violations are not so scary, especially when compared with those that were discussed earlier. But in Switzerland, the protection of property, honest financial transactions and transparency in the economy relate to exceptional severity. Particular attention is paid to even attempts by the so-called small thefts. For example, if a person stole something in the store, took someone else's object from public space or tried to deceive the cash register. However, it is important to distinguish between, if a case of petty theft is the first violation in life, the question may limit himself to a monetary fine or warning. But if the crime is more serious, for example, we are talking about robbery with a threat of force, a series of thefts or complex schemes of fraud, deportation becomes, in fact, a standard measure of clearly spelled out practice. There is a special category. This is a fraud using financial instruments, forgery of checks, illegal withdrawal of money from other people's cards, the organization of schemes for deception of shops or individuals. Even one-time participation in such schemes is of a huge legal risk. In Switzerland, a system has been formed in which such cases reach the migration authorities as quickly as possible, and the issue of deportation is actually resolved in automatic mode. It is important to know that if a person has already come across violations and, for example, after an administrative punishment for 10 years has committed another theft or fraud, the court is almost always making a rigid decision on expulsion. It is important to remember, even citizens of the European Union and those who have long been integrated into the local community can be expelled if economic crimes are proved more than once. Real cases show, there are times when tourists accidentally took something in the store, thinking that the goods belonged to the hotel, or did not pay the work of local self-service cash desks. Even such, at first glance, trifles can question their status. Yes, the fine can be minimal, but they often do not give a second chance. No less risk for those who try the gentleman fraud, for example, deftly manipulates discounts or bonuses in stores. The system takes into account the severity of the offense and the presence of additional aggravating circumstances. Were there threats, whether power was used, were there victims among children or elderly, whether a group of people in conspiracy acted. All this increases the likelihood of a quick and tough decision on deportation without a long-term proceeding and review. Remember, in Switzerland, trust in a person is one of the most expensive values. Even a small deception can put an end to his career, plans and opportunities to return to the country again. Especially vigilant should be those who travel with children or a group of friends. Even a single violation can ruin the reputation of the entire company. Fifth reason, fraud with social benefits. We move on to another, quite relevant, but often underestimated reason for deportation. This is fraud in the field of social benefits and obtaining financial support from the state. If you have ever heard stories about how migrants or even temporary guests manage to arrange benefits illegally, know that in Switzerland such actions are not only condemned, but lead to extremely strict consequences. It is important to understand that the Swiss state is very carefully monitors any attempts to deceive the support system, whether it is unready information in profiles, hiding income, fictitious applications for benefits or distorting family status to receive additional benefits. Even if the amount of payments received seems modest, the fact of abuse of the trust of state bodies becomes the reason for the immediate consideration of the case by migration authorities. In recent years, this problem has become especially significant due to an increase in the number of people who receive various kinds of temporary protection, refugees, and social benefits. Local bodies pay close attention not only to new applications, but also to the already received payments. They can arrange a check even a few months or years after the appointment of assistance. Any inconsistency of the announced data and the real situation automatically becomes the reason for canceling the status and, often, the start of the expulsion procedure. Real cases show, they deport not only those who built complex theft schemes, but also those who only once illegally requested an additional amount or did not report the actual change of place of residence, work or income. Even if you return the money illegally received on demand, this does not always save from deportation. After all, the state considers misconduct as undermining public confidence and risk for the entire system of social support. In addition, attempts to receive a benefit for a child who actually lives abroad, or the registration of assistance for relatives who are not entitled to support, deserve special attention. In Switzerland, these nuances are monitored in automatic mode through integrated databases. If the discrepancy is found out, your explanations will be considered last, and suspicion of fraud can close the path not only to Switzerland, but also to complicate the receipt of visas to other European countries. From personal observation, I'll say that even many law-abiding foreigners sometimes believe that no one will know about the little things, but believe me, in Switzerland, even a slight violation in the field of social benefits can cost you a residence permit, refugee status, the right to work or simply be in the country. Do not risk, the game is not at all a candle, and the consequences are almost always irreversible. Sixth reason, illegal stay or expired visa. We move on to one of the most common grounds for deportation, which actually applies to absolutely all foreign guests, from tourists and students to people who are in the country in humanitarian and working visas. This is a violation of the visa regime and, in simple terms, any delay in legal stay. In Switzerland, the rules of stay are simple and transparent. If you entered for a certain period, whether it is 10 days on a tourist visa or 3 months on a private business visa, in no case should you stay in the country for a day longer than the set time. There are no exceptions to either citizens of neighboring European states, or for the owners of temporary protection or those who filed for refugee status. Exceeding the terms of stay is automatically considered a violation and is considered not as petty negligence, but as a real administrative offense. There is a common misconception that in a one-day delay you will simply scold you or write out a small fine. In practice, it often occurs quite the opposite. Sometimes people give only a few hours to fees and obliged to leave the territory of Switzerland as soon as possible, and information about the offender falls into European databases, and return not only to the Alpine Republic, but also to other countries of the Schengen Agreement. It becomes impossible for many years. Particular caution should be observed for those who have temporary protection as a refugee, student, or even the owner of a residence permit. For example, if you extended the status late, you did not provide documents at the wrong time or did not report a change of residence, there is already a risk of cancellation of permission to stay and the automatic start of the deportation procedure. It is worth remembering cases when a person was in a country on a working visa, the end of which coincided with holidays or weekends. Under Swiss laws, absolutely no one is exempted from liability for such a delay, even if you did not work or received money for days in excess of the permitted period. Real stories show, many people lost the possibility of returning to Switzerland or in general to Europe, and all because of a banal oversight, an expired visa or confusion with dates, which was easy to avoid with attention. Keep your documents under special control, always check the validity period of the residence permit, and do not hope in case. The automation of the exchange of data in Switzerland is arranged so clearly that it is almost impossible to hide the fact of the delay. In this strict, accurate and transparent system, violating the rules of stay is the easiest way to lose the chance to travel in Europe for years to come. 7th reason, entry on false documents. One of the reasons that loves to whisper in lines at passport control is a violation of the rules of entry using fake documents. In Switzerland, such a cunning is considered one of the most unforgivable violations, regardless of whether a visa, passport, work permit, or even only individual stamps in the passport were forged. This can concern both tourists and people who come on family, working or student grounds. Many people think that modern technologies for recognizing documents and databases are only a formality that is easy to circumvent. In fact, in the Swiss airports and at border posts, one of the most advanced systems in Europe work, and fake is opened almost instantly. Even the minimum discrepancy in the data or inconsistencies in the history of trips is suspicious, and employees of migration control receive the right to immediate detention. It is important to emphasize here that the responsibility is borne by not only the one who deliberately acquired fake documents, but also the one who naively used the services of dubious intermediaries. Even if you are sure that your documents are in order, but they found traces of intervention or falsification in them, the procedure can first lead to detention, then to the official interrogation, and then to deportation without the right to enter the country for many years. In some cases, the ban can be installed from 5 to 15 years, and while trying to re-entry, and for life. There are situations when people, trying to accelerate obtaining work permits or residence, are going on from unscrupulous consultants. In Switzerland, a similar method always becomes losing. The accuracy and transparency of the checks of documents here are literally put on the mathematical level, and even the slightest inconsistency leads to automatic exchange of information on the Schengen database of all participants in the agreement. One of the real examples, a tourist who has arrived in the country with a residence permit, formed according to an incredible scheme in a third country, was already detained at the airport. In the future, she was forbidden to enter not only Switzerland, but also in 14 other European states for a period of 10 years. It is important not only not to try to produce or buy fake documents, but also to carefully monitor any problems, mistakes or shortcomings in your real evidence. Even a typo or inconsistency of dates sometimes causes suspicion and becomes a reason for further investigation. Remember, Swiss laws here are as strict as possible, and trust is considered value. My advice to travelers and those who plan a long accommodation: draw up any permits for entry, work, study or accommodation only through official sources. Never agree to accelerated schemes, services of suspicious intermediaries or the purchase of documents abroad. Otherwise, even if the risk seems minimal, the result can be not only deportation from Switzerland, but also unplanned adventures when crossing the borders of other European countries. The 8th reason, illegal labor activity. The time has come to talk about one of the most relevant and at the same time underestimated reasons for deportation. This is work without appropriate permission or violation of working conditions. At first glance, it seems that if you find a part-time job for a vacation or just help friends, then there is nothing wrong with that. But in Switzerland, the laws in this area are so strict and transparent that any, even short-term or, as many people think, is innocent in labor activity without official permission is considered a serious violation of the migration regime. Let's figure out in detail. In Switzerland, every foreign citizen planning to get a job, be it a large international corporation or a small coffee shop, is obliged to get a work permit or a special visa that allows you to work legally. If you came to the country as a tourist, student, participant in educational programs or the owner of a different temporary visa, it is forbidden to work until the corresponding official admission is issued. There are no exceptions for short seasonal works, help an acquaintance or internships without registration. Typical cases, many students or tourists agree to temporary, informal part-time jobs, believing that no one will know about this. Someone cares for children, helps at a construction site, works as a waiter for cash and is convinced that these actions will be left without consequences. However, the Switzerland system of migration control and the tax service of Switzerland is arranged so that control is carried out not only at enterprises, but also during random checks in hotels, restaurants, markets, and even in private houses. Sanctions are provided not only for the offender himself, but also for the employer, which makes the identification of illegal employees to one of the priority areas for control services. Separately, it is worth mentioning the consequences. Usually, administrative punishment is a fine of a rather large size, but almost always an immediate deportation is added to this and, very importantly, a ban on the re-entry into Switzerland, which can last from 3 to 10 years. Moreover, information about the violation falls into a single European database, and in the future this will greatly complicate the design of visas, including other countries of the Schengen zone. It is important to understand, if you have received the status of temporary protection, submitted to the shelter or expect decisions on family reunification, any attempts to engage in illegal labor activity automatically threaten your chance for a legitimate stay. Even a one-time violation, it does not matter whether sewing at home or cleaning in the office, can lead to expulsion without long proceedings, especially if this fact is revealed during a special audit or complaint. There were examples in life when a foreigner accidentally ended up at the workplace. For example, he helped a friend with repairs or participated in the family business, without official permission, and this was turned not only in problems with a visa, but also a long ban on returning not only Switzerland, but also to other European countries. The advice of travelers, students and everyone who dreams of foreign practice: draw up all the documents officially, do not believe the promises "we will solve everything in 5 minutes, do not agree to dubious positions and always check your status." The reputation collected for years can be destroyed by one unofficial part-time job. Ninth reason: lack of financial resources. Many travelers and expanses do not even suspect that one of the main reasons for deportation from Switzerland may be a banal lack of money for living. Especially often this problem is faced with students, temporary workers, owners of tourist visas and even family members who have arrived under reunification programs. In Switzerland, they are extremely attentive to the issue of financial self-sufficiency of visitors. Even at the stage of a visa request, you may be asked to provide an extract from the bank or confirmation of income, which will show that you are able to provide yourself for the entire period of residence in the country. But even after the issuance of a visa, already in the territory of the state, no one cancel repeated checks and requirements for the availability of finances. If during standard control or an unscheduled raid it turns out that you do not have sufficient funds for living, for example, accumulations have ended, there are no confirmed receipts, you cannot pay for housing or medical insurance, this becomes a significant basis for canceling the resolution and the start of the deportation procedure. For tourists, the situation seems very simple: I arrived, spent a bit, and no problems. However, in reality, even those who declared a long stay or arrived with children can be checked. Inspectors have the right to request confirmation of the hotel, ticket reservation, show cash or bank cards with the desired limit. If the amount is insufficient, the authorities interpret this as a risk of illegal stay or attempts to operate social assistance. Particular attention is paid to students and those who apply for a long stay. No educational or practical institution automatically guarantees the right to accommodation if it turns out that the student has no stable revenues or his support is provided with suspicious translations from abroad. There were situations when students were asked to leave the country for a week only because their sponsor could not provide transparent income documents. Do not think that a financial requirement is only a formality. If you got to the hospital and could not pay for treatment, expired rental payments or began to seek free food, all this quickly becomes known to local social services and migration bodies. Inaction or attempts to hide the problems only exacerbate the situation. The checks are carried out very scrupulously, and even an attempt to hide real income is perceived as a lie in official documents. Tip for everyone: plan a budget in advance. Be sure to save bank certificates, housing rental agreements, salary certificates, or student scholarships. In Switzerland, financial transparency is a rule by which your right to be in the country is evaluated not only at the entrance, but throughout the entire stay. Once in a difficult situation, never try to hide it. It is better to seek help from the official organs before the problem becomes the cause for deportation. The 10th reason: violation of the Schengen rules, borders, transit, registration. If you decide to visit Switzerland, be prepared for the fact that outside its borders, not only national, but also pan-European rules apply. These are the so-called Schengen agreements. Ignorance of these subtleties often causes annoying errors that end in a sudden deportation and blocking of the path to all countries of the Schengen zone, and these are 20-7 European states. What exactly is considered a violation of the Schengen rules? First of all, these are any cases of illegal crossing of the border. For example, if you did not enter through the official point, you tried to evade the border inspection or used invalid documents. Even a random, it would seem, misconduct, for example, crossing the internal border on the train. If you have expired, the time of stay will entail serious consequences. Particular attention is paid to the issue of stays. Many guests and even permanent residents mistakenly think that they can jump across the border to neighboring Germany, France, or Italy without problems. But if your visa has ended, even one extra day in any country participating in the agreement is recorded by electronic systems. Inspections are held not only on the borders, but also when landing on international flights, in hotels, when renting transport. Modern databases automatically notify any violations. Tourists run the risk of deporting if they find themselves without official registration at the place of stay or did not notify the local authorities about moving within the country. Failure to comply with registration requirements is most often revealed at contacts with the police, for example, with a small accident or even just while checking documents on the street. It turns out that for the Swiss authorities not only your accuracy matters, but also your respect for the rules of hospitality prescribed in the law on the stay of foreign citizens. Transit rules also require a separate mention. A transit visa is intended only for certain cases, and any of its expanding use, an attempt to stay longer or even just a flight delay without a proper notice, can lead to problems with a visa and expulsion. There are situations when, because of force majeure, a person did not manage to leave the country on time, and if there are no confirmed documents about the reasons for being late, the explanation will be useless. My personal advice: carefully monitor the terms, transit conditions, and registration rules. Keep copies of all confirming documents, armor of hotels, tickets, checks, certificates from the police or airline. If you make an error, immediately contact the local authorities to fix the cause of the violation. After all, one of the admission in documents or deadlines is able to cross out your future trip plans for almost the entire European Union and Switzerland. The 11th reason: a threat to public order and security. Many learned about one of the most serious reasons for deportation, creating a threat to public order and security, when the requirements for guests' behavior in Switzerland were tightened against the background of migration influx and domestic political changes. The focus is any actions that can be interpreted as a potential danger to society, even if formally violations of the law are not recorded where they do not fall under classic criminal articles. Switzerland is very scrupulous to ensure that all those located on its territories observe the established rules of peaceful coexistence, respected the rule of law, and do not allow actions that can cause anxiety among the local population. Typically, deportation on this basis is used with proven participation in activities related to radical groups, promoting extremist views, as well as attempts to organize mass riots, illegal protests, active agitation for illegal goals, or involving other people in such actions. Of particular responsibility are those who are suspected of preparing or even discussing potentially dangerous actions, in which there is at least a hint of a threat of stability, safety, or life and health of citizens. Even if in the literal sense there was no violation of the law, who came to the country can be recognized as a threat and deprived of the right to be in Switzerland for many years. Recently, visitors and newcomers, whose publications on social networks, participation in dubious events, or contacts with suspicious groups allow the internal security authorities, have been closely controlled. For example, if it turns out that a person is associated with organizations banned in the territory of Switzerland, or his behavior causes reasonable fears among local residents, the authorities have the right to begin the extension procedure already at the stage of preliminary verification without the need for a court. In this regard, the Swiss preventive philosophy in law and order is very characteristic: do not wait until the incident occurs, but to act ahead of the slightest suspicion. In some cases, even public statements or the dissemination of information causing panic or enmity are enough. An example of this is cases of deportation of people convicted of the spread of radical content among colleagues or fellow citizens. Tip for guests and residents: respect cultural traditions, do not enter into dubious communities, do not disseminate provocative materials, and try not to conflict with the local population. Remember, in Switzerland, security is considered absolute value, and even a slight suspicion of illegal intentions with a high probability will lead to a quick and tough reaction from the migration organs. The 12th reason: problems with debts or evasion of payments. Now let's talk about the reason that they rarely think about in advance, but which in recent years is becoming more and more relevant for visitors. This is the presence of large debts or evasion of official payments. In Switzerland, financial obligations are especially strict, and this applies not only to citizens of the country, but also of all temporarily or permanent residents of foreigners, as well as tourists, students, and persons in temporary protection status. If you find yourself in a situation where you cannot pay bills, rent, or timely pay taxes and contributions for medical insurance, attention to your person from the migration authorities increases sharply. Even an expired fine for a petty violation or multiple reminders of payment become an occasion to start an administrative proceedings. This is especially true for those who receive any social payments. In the country, inspections of the subsistence level are very popular for everyone who receives help or benefits, and if a non-compliance is clarified, a residence permit can be revoked. One of the important aspects is the situation with medical insurance debts. In Switzerland, the insurance system is arranged so that everyone is obliged to pay contributions monthly, and if debt obligations arise, then after several missed payments the issue can be transferred to the deportation department. There are times when a person lost the right to be in the country due to accumulated debts for treatment, and even if the amount seems small, sometimes a few hundred francs of the delay are enough. An equally serious reason may be evasion of mandatory taxes or fees. If the tax service or social bodies record an attempt to hide income, provide false information, or bypass local rules, this leads not only to fines, but also to immediate revision of your status, cancelling a residence permit, and quick expulsion from the country. A separate category includes cases when foreign students, employees, or entrepreneurs conduct business or make a profit without declaring official income. Such situations often end in blocking bank accounts, arrest property, and automatic entering a surname to the list of persons undesirable for staying in the entire Schengen zone. In real life, there are times when simply forgotten or ignored payments for the apartment became the first link for the guests of Switzerland in a chain of events that ended with a ban on entry for several years. Sometimes people lost not only money, but also the right to receive a visa even after the full repayment of the debt. And all this due to the persuasion in the country. Financial responsibility and conscientiousness are the business card of everyone who lives or even just travels around Switzerland. Remember, for the Swiss authorities, the lack of debts and the honest fulfillment of financial obligations is not only the issue of the law, but also a demonstration of respect for the country of stay. This factor is not at all formality, but part of the culture of trust and mutual responsibility. The 13th reason: violation of the conditions for the provision of asylum or refugee status. Another important reason for deportation, which in recent years is more and more often, is associated with violation of the conditions for the provision of asylum or unlawful use of refugee status. At first glance, it seems that since someone has been provided with protection in Switzerland, he is protected from the risk of expulsion, but in reality the situation is much more complicated. The very status of a refugee or person with temporary protection imposes certain rules and obligations on a person. This is, first of all, honesty in the provision of data about the country of origin, circumstances of life, the reasons for seeking protection. If during the audit it turns out that a person provided false information, hid significant details about his past, citizenship, place of residence, or simply deliberately misled the authorities, this is considered a serious violation. As a result, the defense request may be revised, and the decision is cancelled with subsequent deportation. Particularly strictly relate to attempts to receive asylum in several states at the same time. If the Swiss authorities find out that a person already has an official status in another country in the European Union or submitted several statements in different countries, his case is immediately closed, and the applicant himself is almost always expelled with a ban on returning for many years. No less serious is a violation of the rules of stay as a refugee. Accommodation is not at the address, incorrect conduct of documentation, intentional hiding of income, or receiving assistance from the state according to false or incomplete information. You can also lose the status and be deported for any violations of the laws of Switzerland, especially related to administrative, economic, or criminal offenses. Any crime recorded after receiving the status of protection is considered not only as a violation of the law, but also as the basis for revising the conditions of asylum and subsequent expulsion. In recent years, special attention has been paid to political and social integration. If a person who has received temporary protection defiantly violates laws, participates in shares, associates with radical groups, or behaves aggressively, the state has the right to cancel its status with subsequent deportation. Separate decisions are made very quickly, sometimes on the basis of reports of social workers or local law enforcement agencies. From personal experience and observations, even formal errors in the paperwork, untimely extension of the status, attempts to circumvent the rules can be a reason for the rapid consideration of the case for expulsion. Therefore, those who use or are only going to use the protection mechanism in Switzerland, it is extremely important to observe absolute honesty and transparency at each stage, from submitting documents to integration into a new society. Violation of one of the conditions can lead not only to the loss of the right to defense in Switzerland, but also to the loss of the chances of legalization in other countries of Europe. 14th reason, violation of the conditions of reunification of the family or family life. One of the non-obvious, but very serious reasons for deportation in Switzerland is the violation of the rules and conditions regarding the reunification of the family or the design of residence on the basis of family ties. Switzerland always emphasizes the significance of the family, protects the right to life together with loved ones, but also imposes on these processes especially harsh requirements for documents, transparency, and legality. Firstly, a deportation can provoke a fictitious marriage. This is the name of the situation when the spouses enter into official relations not for the sake of love and life together, but solely for the sake of obtaining permission to stay in the country. To identify such cases, there are entire units engaged in analyzing the details of relations, checking the conditions of cohabitation, conversations with neighbors, analysis of correspondence and everyday life. If officials conclude that there are no real family ties, the residence permit is automatically cancelled, and both participants can receive a ban on re-entry for many years. Secondly, violation of the status conditions applies not only to spouses, but also to parents, children, relatives who claim to move under the reunification of family. For example, representatives of the migration bodies carefully check the relationship according to the documents. In some cases they conduct additional genetic tests. If it turns out that the documents are fake, data on children or parents are falsified, or fictitious connections are established, the punishment of one is severely for any side of the process. The third group of violations arises if the family does not comply with mandatory requirements for joint residence. In Switzerland, one of the main conditions for foreigners arriving on a family visa is living with one family at the registered address. The revealed fact of living is separately, an attempt to hide the actual composition of the family, the deliberate provision of untruths about work, the place of study or income of family members are considered a serious reason for revising the permit and the beginning of the expulsion procedure. The fourth aspect, distortion or falsification of data when submitting documents. Even if part of the information was embellished or was hushed up for the sake of a good goal, if such a violation is discovered, the consequences will be extremely strict for all participants: deprivation of the right to stay, deportation of the entire family team up to minor children, and the cancellation of all future applications for many years. In practice, there were cases when several years after moving, the authorities revealed inconsistencies in the information submitted, which led to the immediate start of deportation even well-integrated people of Switzerland. Therefore, everyone who plans to use the family reunification programs is important to show maximum transparency at all stages, check each document, do not hide the details of family circumstances, and avoid ambiguous situations. Particular attention is paid to cases when, after receiving the right to reunite, family members allow offense or are suspected of fraud, then the deportation is considered immediately and without the possibility of appeal. Switzerland strictly protects the balance between humanity in family matters and the protection from abuse of migration programs. The final chapter, typical mistakes and how to avoid them, universal tips for tourists and expands. Time to summarize the most important thing: why many people, regardless of origin, education and good intentions, still face deportation from Switzerland. I have collected for you a list of typical mistakes so that everyone could protect themselves from serious troubles in advance, and at the same time apply these tips for a calm, predictable life on any trip or long-term living in the country. The most common mistake is inattention to the details of Swiss legislation. Many believe that if something is permissible in neighboring countries, then there are no special differences here. But Switzerland is famous for its punctuality. Each rule is clearly spelled out, and its violation follows a quick reaction of migration and police services. Have you checked the visa period? Exhausted medical insurance? Do you live not on registration or submitted false data? All this will cause official issues, and sometimes it will lead to the cancellation of the status. The second common mistake is the faith in abus and the belief on oral assurances or community's advice on the internet, bypassing official sources. Often it is life hacks from closed chats and forums on how to imperceptibly stay longer, how to correct the questionnaire or solve a household problem, and in the most sad way, deportation and prohibition of entry for many years. In practice, any bypass decisions lead to automated checks, detection of violations and strict sanctions. The third mistake is a lack of financial planning. Many tourists and students do not evaluate their spending on housing, insurance, transport and products. As a result, they are faced with debts, non-payment and administrative penalties. Already at the first major debt, you may not only refuse to extend the status, but also cancel the residence permit. The fourth mistake is an underestimation of formalities when applying for a job, internship, volunteering or part-time work. There are no trifles in Switzerland. Even if you wash the dishes for food or help a friend with repairs, without legal permission, this is a strict violation. Draw up all the documents officially, otherwise you will find immediate deportation and entry of information in pan-European databases. The fifth mistake is disrespect for personal security, public order, and private property. Even small incidents, a quarrel, a careless word or random conflict, are fixed quickly, especially in the era of digital observation and the active participation of civil society. Treat any situations with maximum caution and patience. Many also underestimate the consequences of errors in social benefits, insurance, or family reunification. Even small inaccuracies, and sometimes excessive self-confidence in the correctness of their actions, become the reason for considering the case of deportation. What to do to make a trip, study, or life in Switzerland calmly? Firstly, always check official information about your status, visa, rights, and obligations. Secondly, collect reserve documents, confirmation of income, insurance, armor in advance, so that in case of verification, do not waste time searching an explanation. Thirdly, do not resort to dubious intermediaries, but draw up permission only through state bodies and officially accredited companies. Fourth, respect the culture of the country, avoid conflicts and even suspicious situations. Fifthly, at the slightest doubt or problems, immediately contact a lawyer or consul. I am sure, if you avoid these typical mistakes and follow simple rules, even in the most demanding and punctual country of the world, everyone can feel confident, safely and freely discover this unique corner of Europe. Switzerland is not only strict laws, but also great hospitality for those who are ready to respect its order and value trust. Do not forget about the useful services that we indicate in the fixed comments. Subscribe to the channel, like it. Good rest for everyone.